Okay, our next speaker is Bob Henderson, and I'm sure you recognize his name. Bob is a prolific, well-known writer with countless articles in magazines and books, including our own Nastawagan, of which he is currently a resource editor. Bob has also authored several books, and as Ken was saying, they're on the book table. Buy, buy, buy. They don't want to take these books home. Bob has been an outdoor educator for over 30 years, and he's traveled the outdoors throughout Canada and other parts of the world, canoeing, kayaking, hiking, skiing, and so on. Tonight, he's going to tell us about his trips down the Wind River, where a leisurely paddle turned into near misadventure when the river flooded. And I'm really looking forward to Bob's presentation because we had a similar experience on the Snake. Please welcome Bob Henderson.
So first all, wow, it sounds loud to me. How am I doing? Does that sound good everywhere? Okay. I'd like to thank, I know we've thanked Alex, we've thanked all the volunteers. I'd like to thank, well, another volunteer, Roger, who has managed to help me look like I'm AV efficient. So thank you, Roger. Yeah, to be truthful, I think if you're later in the program, you've got all day to sit and stew about all the great talks, and you know, you build a sort of nervousness because maybe I should incorporate that, and I don't feel any of that because I've been so wrapped up in everybody's talk and to the last talk that I completely forgot that I was giving a talk all day, you know? So that feels really good. But I do, picking up on the last talk, I do feel a real responsibility to try to get it right. And I think this is a talk on, well, I know what it's on. It's a talk. It's a talk on 6 river trips, 2 that I was on, 7 river trips, 2 that I was on. But I do feel a real responsibility to get it right, especially with this audience. And I can't imagine ever doing this talk again. Because I can't imagine ever feeling like I had the right audience to do it. So that's kind of fun too. So a few things at the outset before I get going. The number one thing is I am talking about the Wind River and a flood event that happened to me in 2016. I'd done the river in 2014 in medium low water. Ironically, while that's what I'm talking about, essentially just a flood event, I have almost no pictures of that event. Because who takes pictures when they're involved in something that's really daunting and when you're on the edge of control and you start to take pictures, you're not really on the edge of control. Yeah. So I guess the crushing irony here is I have no pictures of what I'm talking about. But near misadventures don't equate with photographs. So I think I've got one. Anyway, it's going to be a great talk. But I am talking about the Peel watershed, which has come up a few times. I've paddled the Wind a couple of times, the mountain and the Keel. I've had mixed different water levels. I know how important the water levels are. I knew I was due for some kind of flood event. I think I was in a doozy, and that's why I'm here. In 2014, I had medium low water, and in 2016, I started the Wind River with medium high water, I think, at the outset, and ended up in a big flood. I've got images from 3 different trips. Most of those groups are, all those groups were 1 or 2016. What am I saying? All those are groups from 2016. So I've got a variety of slides, not just my own, and then I've got the stories from 3 other groups. I interviewed 6 different people, people with Black Sheep Aviation, some guides that were friends, some outfitter admin types, and some local residents who, in Whitehorse, who treat the Peel watershed like we would the Madawaska and the Petawawa. So people that were really familiar with the river over decades. Okay, so a little bit about the group that I was with, because that's obviously going to be very important. So in 2015, I had some friends who I've done lots of sea kayaking trips with, and hiking trips and ski trips in Europe and Canada, and great friends. And 3 of the group of 6 had never been on a northern trip, and they said to me, boy, you know, if we're going to do one northern trip in a lifetime, and you know, we're getting on in age, what's that trip going to be? And would you take us, and you know, would you essentially guide us on our one and only river trip. And I chose the wind because of the great hiking. 15 days seemed about right for them. And some modest white water and a good mix of terrain with coming out in the Peel, some variety. So it just seemed like the perfect trip. I'd done the trip in 18 days, which I needed because of some really rough weather. So I was even worried that 15 days wasn't enough. But you can do that river in 10 days pretty comfortably. So what's my point of that? In the group that we had 3 people that were comfortable in whitewater, but nobody was comfortable in the flood that I'm going to be showing. And there were 3 people that were new to whitewater at all, and they weren't particularly uncomfortable because they didn't know what the hell they were doing. One other funny thing, just in case this has happened to you, I'm really big on 17-foot canoes, less big on 16 for these river trips, but I wanted to have 2 17 and 1 16 because I thought it would be fun to have a frisky boat that might play in the braids better and just might work better for 2 of the people that maybe were new to paddling in whitewater, and it just was an idea. I ended up not taking a real good look at the boats that were already on the trailer at up north in Whitehorse, and we ended up with 2 16-foots and 1 17-foot. And for the sort of biggish people that were on the trip, I thought that had consequences as well in the events that followed. All right, so I never even thought about this. Do I control this? Oh, good.
This one.
Oh. So I knew if I thanked Roger at the beginning, he'd come back and... Okay. Right. Okay, well, that's actually Mount Deception. That's going to become important, but that's just an opening slide. You'll see it again, I think. I want to tell you where we are here. This is like many trips of this nature. Let's get going, and you fly into a alpine lake, and they fly away. This is McCloskey Lake. It's a beautiful place to start. Great hiking, just classic way to start. And like many of the rivers in this country, you then have to canoe or drag or a creek to get to the main part of the river. And then you have some early narrow river work, sometimes some braids. Sometimes this is a tricky place. With low water, this was pretty easy going, and people could do some point and shoot stuff and some backfairing stuff, and it's a really great introductory trip to get people comfortable in the water. And then you get some shallow braids, and while this was really easy in 2014, as the picture shows here, in 2016, this was awkwardly lining with willows and pushing back bushes and having to really scout out the way to go. So, it was, of course, I didn't know any of that in 2014. I was really startled in 2016 to see the difference in the day 2 braids on the upper wind. Of course, the fishing's great, grayling, and I also thought that I would be traveling in different braids. In other words, the river would change over the winter, and I'd be in one braid one year, and the next year I'd be in another braid. Although the water levels were quite different, it was the exact same route through everything, which still, I'm not sure if that was odd to me or that trip, but that we fished in that pool 2 years running. I want to give you the impression of an idyllic-looking river, not an idyllic-looking couple, but there's the river in medium-low water, and just a joy to paddle. And for first-timers, the perfect river. River tripping, great light. Great hiking. This is coming out of a slot canyon. I tell some of these things because some of you folks have been there, of course, coming out of the slot canyon. And again, look at the water levels and look at the river here in the mid part of the wind. Of course, there's going to be some storms, and great to sit those out and make sure you got the time to sit them out. There's going to be some snow, maybe. Could be wind. Well, we had a group. We had 18 days, but when it kind of cleared up a little bit in terms of wind and rain, but it was overcast, it seemed just ridiculous to leave, because in these vertical landscapes, you don't want to miss them. And so we waited extra days just even to get clear skies. So there was a day we could have gone, and we said, no, I want to see this river and not put in 30K and miss that section too overcast. So we waited a little bit extra to get these kind of days, which we got. And in the awkward weather, we were hiking, and mid part of the wind, lots of braiding. I really want you to focus on the river and the water levels there, and get a feel for the river here in 2014. Beautiful, beautiful water. Lower down on the river now. Eventually you're going to leave the mountains entirely. Always fun wildlife to see. This is a very important slide because this is the slide at Mount Deception on a climb. So we camped just in the right corner on the gravel bar and walked up that hill right from the campsite and take a look at the river. I didn't climb it in 2016 and get the picture again with another group because it started to rain there for us. Now in the Peel watershed to the west, it had already been raining apparently for 4 or 5 days. But we had that weather and it had been raining on the Peel. So we had no idea there was anything going on. So when it rained for us, we didn't think it was a big deal. We just got some rain. But elsewhere, where we were going, it had been raining for 5 days. So this is 2014. Take a good look at that water. That's lower down on the wind in 2014. We camped right on the beach there. We wanted to go somewhere else, but didn't get there. Look again at the braids in the river and the pretty easy flow down that left braid. This is people who recognize this if they've been there. Take a look at that terrain on the wind. You don't really see any braids there, but there's one that obviously off the picture, and then there's 2 more channels near the end there you could have opted for. And now we've left the wind in 2014 and we're on to the Peel. Look at that soccer field. So that's what the river was like, and I had planned in 2016 to pull off the river and have a little bit of a ceremony with a little bit of rum, and but we didn't do that. So there's the Peel Canyon. We're on our way to Taco Bar, down the Peel for 3 days or so. You can see in medium-low water how much room there is to get off the river, how relatively gentle the canyon is. And there's white water in there. It's grade 2 rapids. The guidebooks say when there's higher water, it's grade 3 rapids. There's some narrow channels and some boilers and some waves. You got to kind of hit them right and brace. I remember my friend Patty Blair, as we just got onto the Peel from the wind in 2014, she said, "Oh, I prefer the wind much more. I don't like these boilers." So she was kneeling in the canoe because she just didn't like the boilers. Boilers are really hard to show up in photographs as being something that's treacherous. So she was concerned about the Peel because she couldn't sit in the boat. There's more of the Peel Canyon. Of course, I want you to focus on the water levels. We pulled off every single place. We went through the canyon as slow as you could go without camping, but I just didn't want to camp because I didn't want to discover that there may be a flood. Like I was a little paranoid about the concept of being there. So we didn't. We went through and camped on the other side. I kind of regretted it. We should have camped in the canyon in 2014. Again, the canyon's beautiful. I'm trying to find a shot that gives you a sense of the rapids. You want it. You want to be on the outside there. Anyway. Now we're in 2016, or are we? And it's starting to rain, and we're at Mount Deception, and that's what our campsite looked like. And in the next day, it rained hard all night. We decided to sit out the rain, and maybe it would clear up in the afternoon. We didn't. We had lots of time. Of course, knowing what I know now, we should have gone. That's early on the day because we got there with a lot of time to hike. This is the wind downriver from that. Not a lot of braids. So you're going to see rocks there where we'd put rocks to see how the water was going up. Okay. Now they're gone, but when we started that process, we had about 7 or 8 rocks, and then we just, we sort of gave up. So I don't know if that gives you the impression of a flood, or you need more. I don't have a lot more because what I had was a visceral experience of moving quicker than, it'd be the kind of thing where we left that campsite. Well, first of all, we got to that campsite having left at noon. We probably got there around 3 o'clock because we just didn't want to paddle. So we pulled into the campsite and still thought, well, maybe the water will go down, but it's been misty, rainy. It was hard for me in the lead boat to see. And we camped earlier than we wanted to because we didn't know what it would be like going out to the Peel, and we thought we'd just catch our breath. People were spooked a bit, and then we just watched the water levels rise and rise. Of course, we kept doing the wrong thing, right? If we'd known what we were to discover, hindsight and all that sort of thing, we would have just paddled, try to get ahead of everything. This is the only shot that I took. This is two of our group coming in to a former braid, like what you see on the left slide. And the water levels were so fast that it's the kind of river where, and I'm sure many of you had the experience where you go, oh, look, a rock. We better get ready to make a move. And by the time you're making the move, you've hit the rock, or you've just missed the rock. And that's not an experience I have a lot of. Actually, I remember having it on the Barron Lakes in the river system there and hitting the rock that I thought I could easily avoid. So we went over a sweeper. One of the group went over a sweeper here. I mean, I just missed it. And we went over the sweeper. So that was good, but we had some water in the boat. We couldn't find easy shoreline to get, all those usual things that aren't that difficult, to get water out of the boat. There was no real place to do that. So it was all sort of a little spooky. And it was the kind of water, remember I had people that hadn't done hardly any whitewater paddling. Well, they'd done 10 days up to that point. The kind of place now where you needed to have your angles, your leans rather. If you want to eddy back into the river, you have to have the lean. If you don't have the lean, you're really shifty in the boat and it's not so good. So that's what it was like, and that wasn't a skill that they were going to get necessarily on this trip. That was a skill they sort of had to probably already have. So we stopped and did this really, really slowly. That's a back shot to show you what it was like in 2014. That's within a K of 2 kilometers of where this shot is. So it's a completely different river. And in some cases, those big trees, they were, you were seeing the tops of them. So we get out to now I got no pictures because it was really scary. So now we're out onto the Peel, and this is the Peel in flood at the Bonnet Plume. What was happening for the folks in the back, so here's what happened. Here's what I don't have pictures of. We came out from the wind onto the Peel thinking that the water now was going to be better. Kate Weeks, who I talked to, she's one of the people I interviewed actually, and we had a nice chat today. She said she experienced this same feeling that, and I admitted in complete naivete, I thought that the water the big water, if there was even big water, where is this flood? Is it just the wind? Is it really the Peel? What's going on? I thought that there was no point in using a cell phone at this point, or a sat phone rather. I thought the Peel would absorb the water better. But of course, this was where the flood had happened, upriver on the Peel, and the wind had just caught the edge of it. The Bonnet Plume was never in flood, which is the next river down. So we came out onto the Peel, and I think that's the next picture. Oh, no. Well, we'll just look at the Peel here. So this is on the Bonnet Plume Delta. At the edge of the slide to the right, you're going to see the beginning of the canyon. And you're going to see some shoreline, as the best shoreline that we found. That was the best. So we tried to pull out 2 other times on the other side of the river left, and we couldn't. We couldn't, it was too dangerous to get the boats in. We got a boat in, we had to saw our way in to just look, and then we decided, no, it's not, we can't camp there. But nobody wanted to paddle anymore, but we had to find a campsite. And so we went across the river, and the people behind the lead boat were worried because of that debris in the river. Basically, there was always the way to describe the debris, there was always some debris there. And they were, big trees, what have you, and there was always something there. And to the people behind, they were worried that it always looked like we were playing with these debris trees. But we never, in the lead boat, I never had that experience because I didn't see in front of me. So that was just sort of an interesting perspective thing. When we first got out onto the Peel, we had planned to go off on that River Right beach that I showed you, and we ended up not being able to do that and just going right down the middle of the wave through standing waves, the kind of standing waves where you're bracing for your life and the boat is bobbing and you're not sure you're going to make the bob, You're going to land the bounce. Well, I'm not sure I'm going to land the bounce, and so I'm doing it, and then I'm looking back behind at people in 16-foot canoes because we were taking a lot of the gear, and really thinking, oh boy, I wish we had. There's a lemon. I wish we had the 17-foot boats. So we switched some gear around to try to lighten those boats. We stopped right away. Interestingly enough, Kate Weeks and Tom Alexander with Sea and Sky, an outfit out of Vancouver. They were guiding a group with new canoeists. They had virtually the exact same experience. They wanted to pull off on River Right. They were a couple of days behind us. There was a bit of gravel shoreline, but they had to go right through this same wave train, which caught them by surprise as well. So what do you do when you camp on the Bennett Plume Delta? You're kind of waiting out weather? Well, you bake a bannock, you play guitar. That's a good-looking lick there. Oh, no, it's a coffee cup. I'm not playing very good guitar. You read a book, you just sort of settle in. When we were doing the wind and the Peel in the flood, I had really difficult time seeing. I don't have contacts, and it was that misty Scottish stuff going on, and so I couldn't really see a thing. That was a real factor for me. The next day, it was really good weather, and we thought, great, the water levels are going to drop down, and we'll give it a day or two and we'll go. But we either made the mistake or the wise decision of making some phone calls. So we called out. The other thing that happened at this campsite, before I tell you the phone call, is we pulled in a kind of a desperate way. It doesn't look desperate there, but we pulled in a desperate way, and I didn't want to tell anybody, but they probably figured it out for themselves and didn't want to tell anybody, but the water table was rising in our campsite. So places where there weren't puddles, there were puddles 4 hours later. That kind of freaked me out a bit, but like anybody else, I just went and looked for other places to camp, and it was fine, and it would have been fine. What's next? Oh, well, you have a great time. But, you just have a great time. So here's another look.
Watching the Peel in full flood. There's the canyon. Up ahead.
So at this point, we thought, okay, it's a nice day, but the water level's still rising. So we got on the sat phone and said, hey, we can make it to Taco Bar in a day if the water levels really drop. And they said, oh, the water levels aren't dropping. Don't go to Taco Bar. It doesn't exist. So Taco Bar is the standard takeout after the Snake. So I said, well, it doesn't exist. I mean, I've been there recently. I said, no, there's no place to be at Taco Bar. And so we have friends. What happened to our friends? The friends were a few days ahead of us. And I've got some pictures of their story. And those friends, their story's coming up. So I knew the Taco Bar didn't exist, really. I also found out that the highway was closed in 5 places upriver, where near the Blackstone, where the highway is on the upper part of the flat country on the upper Peel, and we just decided that we would sit this out. But the phone calls were kind of important. So they said you're going to be waiting a while, and we're not going to pick you up for a while. And as long as you're seeing debris on the river, we're not coming because the debris is crazy. We can't land. And they had actually closed the ferry at Fort McPherson, which I was told has happened by a 60-year-old gentleman. I was told, to his knowledge, it's happened once in his lifetime. So I mean, I took that as major news. And we decided that we would explore the idea of, truthfully, I didn't want to, there was no place to rescue. There was a few things that were big lemons. There was no place to do a rescue with my skill level. I couldn't imagine rescuing a boat that would go over where there was no shoreline. What happened with Kate Weeks is their group found a 10-foot wet gravel bar that they had to do a major upstream ferry to find that we didn't find when we were going down. So they had stopped later, a couple of days later, they'd stopped and they stayed 3 days. So it would have, in the end, it would have been 6 days. And I didn't want to paddle the canyon with the group because I was worried about that sweeper that none of us wanted to hit that we went over. So we called Black Sheep, and they gave us the name of a helicopter, and we called the helicopter company. I'd never called a helicopter company before. And they said, well, if we have to basket the canoes, put them in a basket, it's going to cost you 15 grand. So we recommend that you burn the canoes. So I called up north and I said, hey, they want us to burn the canoes. We're thinking we might leave the canoes at a good high spot, tell you where they are, and you can go get them at the end of the season. And they said, well, we don't like either of those ideas. And I said, well, I think we're leaning towards not going, you know, and down the river. And so when the helicopter arrived, we just thought all we can do is be really helpful and see what unfolds. So we did this. And in the end, it cost us $5,000. And they just took us up the Bennett Plume to the first lake. And then it was a much cheaper flight to get out because we didn't go further to Taco Bar. So in the end, it wasn't that much of a money issue. And we discovered that we would have been 6 days to get out. I'm just checking my time here. Okay, so there's the helicopter heading away. This is illegal, I think. I'm not going to tell you the name of the company. Oh, there it is. Because I believe this is illegal, but the guy said he'd do it. So he took one of the group out. And this is the Bennett Plume at some point from the air. You can see the braids that are covered up in the top left. There's the canyon. Oh, the second trip, I was on the second trip, and we got to, he gave us a little joy ride through the canyon. So there's the canyon in, I'm going to say, dare I say, full flood. And while it doesn't look like much, there's boilers in there and waves in there that you don't want to experience. Remember all those flat bits when you come around the corners in the canyon? That second narrows, that's pretty big. And I think that would have been too much for our group. I'm not convinced we could have paddled through that. On the right side, you see that little bit of, that was where I showed you that walking picture. So it's in flood. That's the walking picture. So just, isn't it interesting seeing the difference there? So that's going up the Bennett Plume, which was not in flood. That's the upper wind at the top, not in flood. That's Taco Bar, not in flood. That's Taco Bar. I got to make sure I get this right. I feel this responsibility. That's Brian, Simon, Jane, and Kate arriving. And that's higher than I experienced it. And, the next morning, the water was in the willows. And the next day, it was high on the bank. So if you've been to Taco Bar, there would have only been one place to get out of the water. And it would have been at the top of that, the top right. Anyway, the place where people play bocce ball and hang out in the back bay, that's what it looked like. And that's the only reason why Black Sheep could get them, was they went into the back bay, which 24 hours earlier was, they'd played bocce ball there. And you can see it's, they're on sort of 3 feet of water, I guess. And that was 24 hours later. So what did they say? The water levels were going up, I'll save that. So this is another trip now. This is Bruce Hawkins, and he'd come down the Heart, which is upstream for us and upstream from the Wind. And sometimes this is paddled by groups, and you can, get to these ledges and just line over them. It's not that difficult, but look at the water in the background there. So they were pretty scared coming down that. They were camped down here, and the boats were down there. You can see a tent on the left. Then water levels, you could see the water levels rising if you look at the top of the frame. And so there's a better look at the boats. They lifted the boats higher up. They ended up camping up high up there. And they saw that slide. They saw that water go. They saw that slide go. And they said it was about 150 feet. They had to, there's some debris from their pictures. And those trees that you're looking at, they had to cut them down for the plane to arrive. They waited 3 days. There's the trees gone. And they waited 3 days to be bailed out. So now I want to pause and I want to say, let's remember those 11 days of pure joy on the river. And remind ourselves that what joyous times that was, because that's what you want to remember, and you don't want the flood event, which was kind of spooked people, to take over.
The best part about it for me is living in the moment, because it's not something I'm very good at doing. I tend to be very future-oriented, and people who are future-oriented are often anxious. So you might find it hard to believe of me, because I have certainly had my anxious moments on this trip.
Yoga.
But it's only been about anxiety about what's right in front of me, right now, and right in the present. And I've gone to bed each night with not a thought about the day before or the day after. So that's one of the best things for me.
And now I am gleefully anticipating a thrilling and unexpected helicopter ride tomorrow.
I think that's it. Yeah, that's it for that, but it's not it for me. I think I've got about 5 minutes, 2 minutes. So another group, they were caught upstream and they tied their boats to trees and they spent the night. They didn't want to be interviewed. Another group walked out they decided they could walk out on the flat terrain and they could walk out the 10K. When they started, the water was at their ankles. The water went over the bank, and when the water was up beyond their knees, they hit their spot device. Helicopter came within 5 minutes because it was already rescuing people on the highway 10K away, and it dropped a saw, and they cut out 26 trees so that the helicopter could rescue them. They didn't want to be interviewed. So I don't know, was it like the storm of the century, like we have in Toronto all the time? No, or was it a regular 4 or 5 day, was it a regular 4 or 5 year run? Guzman, a company that is out of Haines Junction, have stopped going to the Peel. Black Sheep have moved their operation out of Mayo. Somebody else has taken over. I don't know if it's related. Taco Bar is gone, and apparently they now do pickups upriver from that. I talked to people who told me that it wasn't a big deal. I talked to other people that said they'd never seen anything like it in 50 years. What to say? I don't really know. I know that we were the only group that was in the Wind and the Peel in the full flood. We knew the group behind us, and the water level was going down. Kate Weeks was on that trip, and we knew the group in front, and I've talked to both of them. So what do I want to say about it really quickly? I think I've got 3 points. One is culture moves. In 1983, I did a 45-day trip, PG Downs and Farley Mowat, and people have talked about this area on this particular seminar. And we had a discussion about emergency devices, and calling out, and with whatever the device was in '83, it was hard to get. It was a nightmare if we had that debate because people didn't want them, and other people did. So now that it's sort of a given that you've got it, but I certainly remember a day when it would never have been seen. I've also had 8 joint surgeries, so I'm more inclined to want to take the phone now. Point number 2, context. The right thing to do is always in context, to the group, to the specifics of weather, to the cost, to the commitment, to the finish, mostly to the group. It's very hard not to judge another group, but resist the temptation. With the group that Margot and I were guiding, we think we made the right decision, but point number 3, it's a terribly unsettling feeling for 2 reasons. One, it's really weird to call for help. It feels very unnatural if you're trying to render the past as a felt experience, And 2, the river, when a river spooks you, and nature throws this at you, it's unsettling, and it's unsettling for a long time. So it's not something I embrace with great joy. I really wish it hadn't happened to me. Boy, that's a good way to finish.